Great. So thanks everyone for being here. I am going to be talking about a study that I did with Avery Holton at the University of Utah, and I'm at the University of Texas, and it's about breast cancer misinformation on Pinterest. Aha, that works. So why were we interested in investigating health misinformation on Pinterest? It's something that in 2017, when there was a lot of concern bubbling up about Facebook and Twitter, but there was a little bit less about other social media sites, some news organizations started to investigate, and BuzzFeed was a notable early one, not anything scientific, but they found a lot of false claims, such as this one. And then there was an interesting little ad hoc experiment that was done by a professor named Mike Caulfield at at Washington State University at Vancouver. He started out with a blank slate on Pinterest, and it quickly, just by saving two misleading pins related to vaccination and autism, it very quickly filled up into a slew of misinformation and conspiracy theories. So I started thinking with my co-author about how we could do an examination of misinformation content on Pinterest. And you might be asking, well, is that interest in Pinterest justified? And I would argue that it is. Pinterest is one of the biggest social media platforms with 322 million users a month, and health is one of its most popular topics. And Pinterest is also overwhelmingly popular with women. So the user base is 70% female, which means that actually 42% of US women are on the site. Pinterest as a platform relies heavily on visuals, which have a unique persuasive ability. And we decided to focus on breast cancer because that is one of the most prevalent cancers among women, and every woman in the US has a 1 in 8 chance of developing breast cancer in her lifetime. So what we did was we hand-coded pins, or that's basically what you call a post on Pinterest. We started with a sample of 797, and we classified pins according to, first of all, whether they made a claim about what users could do to prevent or treat breast cancer. And then if they did not, we did not study them further, but if they did make such a claim, we analyzed whether there was misinformation present by comparing the claims against those of several reputable organizations. We coded for the presence of conspiracy theories and the type of website that the pin linked to. And we also took notes on the misinformation presented, which allowed us to create a typology that you'll see in a little bit of types of misinformation as well as topics of misinformation. So what we found was that 22% of the initial batch of 797 pins made a claim about what users could do to prevent or treat breast cancer. So those were the ones that we analyzed further, and just over half of them, 51%, contained misinformation. So breaking down, what does that look like? What is the misinformation all about? We broke it down, and we found that 40% were about foods that supposedly prevent, treat, or cause cancer. Another 20% of misinformation pins were about vitamins, minerals, herbs, and supplements. Another 10% were about supposed environmental causes, most notably, most overwhelmingly about antiperspirants. And then there were all sorts of other, in the other category, we have the stages of breast cancer, symptoms, surgery, hormone treatment, the role of faith in treatment, breast self-exams, benign lumps, research organizations, and other alternative medicines besides the foods and the supplements that we already talked about. So just to see a little example of what some of these pins look like, looking at the food claims, which, as I mentioned, were 40% of the misinformation, a lot of them were mild and nonspecific, even among the misinformation. So things like Mediterranean diet for breast cancer, foods to eat, and foods to avoid to fight breast cancer. Others went further, proposing that 10 certain foods prevent breast cancer completely, or posing cream of cauliflower soup as the breast cancer conqueror. So there was a real variety. in the types that we saw. Some pins actually advocated for the use of turmeric, which interestingly I heard some people mentioning at lunchtime. Turmeric is a substance that the Breast Cancer Foundation, Susan G. Komen, sounds a warning about, saying it should be used cautiously by people with breast cancer until more about its effects are known. So the second most popular topic that we saw was supplements, vitamins, minerals, and herbs. And again, there was a lot of variety that you see here. Sometimes it was really posing a particular substance as like an add-on for a healthy lifestyle, saying this tree bark can help heal digestive issues and may even fight breast cancer. But sometimes they really went further in terms of proposing these substances as substitutes for more evidence-based treatments. So what we have here is an example that really is problematic on a whole other level. What it pictures is colloidal silver, which the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center says cannot cure cancer. Not only that, but long-term use of silver can cause seizures and kidney damage. So it's a dangerous thing to be promoting. Besides analyzing the topics of misinformation, we also talked about misinformation types. So we analyzed these and divided them into these 6 types. We classified 55% of the pins as exaggerated, and that means that the pin draws a conclusion that cannot be logically drawn, even though it is based on a kernel of verifiable information. We classed another 19% as no evidence, which means that reliable sources document a lack of evidence for the claim in the pin. And then another 17% were inaccurate, which means reliable sources provide information that actually shows the claim in the pin to be false. And then the others, outdated, contraindicated, error by omission, I'll talk about in a second. But let's just dig into those bigger categories. So here's an example of an exaggeration, saying the humble vitamin D cannot be ignored, when in reality the findings of vitamin D are far from conclusive. We don't really know for sure whether it has anti-cancer properties. There are exaggeration related to all sorts of foods and supplements, probiotics, flaxseed, dandelions, green tea, also related to the benefits of thermography, and that was exaggerated when it was compared to the benefits of mammography. An example of a no evidence claim, here we have supposedly the best way to prevent breast cancer is to detoxify your armpits, even though the National Cancer Institute says that there's no scientific evidence linking antiperspirants to breast cancer. Other no evidence examples had to do with, again, food and supplements. Those were very popular. Just to give you a little overview of what were the other kinds of types of misinformation in our typology, we also had inaccurate, we talked about inaccurate. We also had outdated, which means the claim once was true but is no longer. A lot of those were about the recommended age to start getting mammograms, which was recently changed. We had contraindicated, which means that reliable sources warn against doing what's in the pin. So the colloidal silver, again, would be an example of that. And error by omission, meaning that the pin leaves out information which is really crucial in that context. An example of that would be a pin that's all about how to detect breast cancer, and it doesn't actually mention there may be a lump or a change in the breast. So, and just a couple other points one other point really before I wrap up. We found that pins were overwhelmingly not conspiracy related, at least in this study, in this subset of pins that we were examining. The few to mention conspiracy theories either alleged that information on cancer is being withheld from the public or implied that research organizations are profiting from cancer. But you can see in the pie, actually I should have labeled my pie, but I believe it was 95% that were not conspiracy related. So what does all this mean? Well, misinformation on breast cancer does appear to be pretty abundant on Pinterest. A lot of it may seem innocuous. some of it is really not. So we saw the colloidal silver one. That's a dangerous substance that people should not be trying to medicate themselves with. Even the more innocuous seeming ones, like use the Mediterranean diet. Well, if someone is getting from that the impression that, you know, that the Mediterranean diet is a proven cure or a proven preventative method, and they're and they're doing that instead of using more scientifically based methods, then that comes to be a problem. You know, Pinterest has promised to take down dangerous health and misinformation, and they have done in a lot of cases, but this does raise the question if they should be doing more. I think it's useful to have a typology like we outlined, because that gives perhaps a method of distinguishing. Maybe it's more important to focus on those things that are contraindicated or no evidence as opposed to the exaggerated claims. It's something to think about. And finally, this work illustrates what myths healthcare workers might want to think about addressing, or what they might expect to come up when they're talking with patients. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take your questions. Oh, yes.
I'm wondering if you did the segmentation of benign versus harmful cancer cures, and if not, whether any resources from the FDA or otherwise exist to even be able to use them.
Benign versus harmful cancer cures. Yeah, I'm not sure how you would, that's an interesting question, and I would be happy to look into that. I don't know what resources, you know, if someone, if it has been split up in that way. Have you seen it sort of designated in that way, or is it just a completely innocent question?
No, I'm asking because
yeah.
I haven't seen it, but it could just be that I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I could imagine it would be quite difficult to draw the line, because any substance taken to excess could be harmful, and so it's difficult to know where you would draw that. But I'm sure there must be criteria you could draw. Yeah, I don't know. I would be interested to find that as well. That's a good question. Sure.
Can I ask something about sort of the methodology?
Yes.
Are you making a distinction between sort of people who are deliberately putting these things on their page and versus Pinterest sort of aggregating them? I mean, how does it work? I don't know Pinterest very well.
Okay. So what we did was we used a program called ParseHub to basically scrape Pinterest. So it was acting as if it was automating the process, but it was basically acting as if I was going to Pinterest and just typing in breast cancer or breast plus cancer and seeing what, as a search, yeah, and seeing what results popped up. Yeah, it's notable that we didn't actually pin anything to our board, and we weren't seeing what like auto-populated our board. So, you know, that might actually turn out to, if we did it that way, that might even give more kind of insidious results, because when you start to select these things and pin them, it recognizes that those what you're interested.
That's sort of related to the question from the previous session, which is that is there a sort of radicalization process that goes on?
Yeah.
Once you click on one of these things, that you're fed a whole bunch more lies.
Yeah.
And more lies, and then you kind of get activated into these conspiracy, or you know, whatever grape juice, you know, secures everything, or whatever it is.
Yeah, and we didn't analyze it in that way, but like a great example, and it is, you know, it's one example and it's anecdotal, but if you want to see that, something like that process in action, that example I gave of Mike Caulfield at Washington State University, he basically, he seeded his account with a couple of vaccine-related posts, and it auto-populated with, it just became a rabbit hole. But yeah, it's, that would be an interesting next step to try and do a study to look at that mechanism. All right, is that it? Can't see the audience. Okay, great. Thank you very much.